Hello and welcome back to Kim Reads as we continue with Straight On Till Morning. And she flew. Wendy fell backward into a sky a little more rapidly than she had intended. It was like a dream she had once or twice, suddenly pulling up into the air, snatched out of a narrative away from monsters or loved ones. Her heart jumped at the unnatural movement, but she didn't stop. Barreling forward, she stuck her arms out, and there, her fingertips brushed against steady warm wind that Tinker Bell looked for when she had great distances to fly. It streamed almost directly due north, so she would have to get off and take off at some point, but ease the journey somewhat. She banked into the thermal, feeling important. For the first time in her life, she was on a quest where people needed her for real things. For survival, not just for a pop button or emergency trip into the market for some dinner veg. If she failed, it would mean disaster for her, friends, and all of Neverland. And what precisely would Hook do if she failed? If he succeeded in catching Peter? How would he end Neverland rather permanently? Would he use dark powers to call up a titanic storm and sink it like Atlantis? Could Peter's shadow have something to do with that? Would he somehow rain down fire and lava? Well, Wendy didn't intend to find out. She stretched and frowned, flying a little faster. Was that the shadow down, almost gliding, rippling over the trees? She didn't look. At least now she could return to London. And speaking of, and what would she do once Hook was defeated? He must be. Wendy had wanted adventure. Now she had gotten herself one. She could go back home and live the rest of her life on recollections from past several days, spooning out carefully knitted measures of memory to live on. Existence grew dull. She could write an entire book on what had happened. She could try to get it published and watch with some amusement as readers drank up her fantasy. Or she could just keep it in her notebook to be taken out and read it to eventual children in her life. She could stay in Neverland forever. No, that didn't feel like she had grown up a little, and like slightly, she chafed at some of the unchanging and arbitrary aspects of Neverland. Maybe Peter Pan was king of the island in his own way. They were very similar, or even dependent on each other in some way. Neverland was dependent on London and the rest of the world. So the real question was, what would Wendy do with her life, back in the real world? What lay in between household and mermaids? What would give her adventure of the London sort? And changes, and a change for the better of both worlds. John knew he could choose between being a doctor, banker, academic, or barrister. Even shipping, if he had any ability that way, he didn't. There were known potential failures. But despite all reading, Wendy hadn't been exposed in any way to the idea that there were any possibilities for her, all the unhappy spinster or unhappy housewife. Those were all thoughts, and uncomfortable ones. She felt a little stirring of self-incrimination. Why hadn't she even thought of things like that before? Why hadn't she noticed the invisible prison she was in? Because, she told herself grimly, I'd never been able to fly before. Below her, Neverland unrolled in shades of green except for the misty, unavailable area on the northwest. Wendy gave that place a salute. The first had said there were people whose idea of Neverland meant a single warm meal for the day. There were girls who weren't held back by the well-meaning parents or society, but by poverty or generally terrible parents who treated them like possessions to trade. There were girls who had no chance simply because of the color of their skin. Sometimes stories needed to be pushed along. Things needed to happen. There were people who were needed to do things. Sometimes whole societies need to be pushed along in the right direction. The landscape below changed, and the Black Dragon Mountains came into view, as blurry and smug as ever. It was time to turn east. Wendy felt her heart clench. She was so wanting to see the mountains and a real dragon. She wondered if maybe she needed some time to dip on her way back from the Lost Boys just to peep. She signed and banked right. Probably not. It would be somewhere for her to dream about later, to wonder about and imagine on dark days. And that's the end of that chapter. See you later.